A man absolutely couldn't stand his wife's cat. One day, fed up, he decided to get rid of it for good. He put the cat in his car and drove 20 blocks away, dropping him off in a park. But when he got home, the cat was sitting on the doorstep as if nothing had happened. Frustrated, the man decided to take it further the next day. He drove the cat 50 blocks away, parked, and let him out. Again, he returned home to find the cat waiting for him. "This is impossible," the man muttered. "Tomorrow I'll make sure he can't come back." The next day, he drove around in circles, taking endless turns, right, left, right, and so on. After about an hour of twisting and turning, he finally let the cat out and headed home. A few hours later, the phone rang. His wife picked it up and the man asked, "Is the cat there?" "Yes," his wife replied. "He's been here for a while. Where are you?" The man sighed. "Put that little bastard on the phone. I'm lost and need directions." A state police officer sitting by the side of the highway waiting to catch speeders saw a car creeping along at 22 YeahMad. He thought to himself, that's just as dangerous as speeding, so he turned on his lights and pulled the car over. As he approached, he noticed 5 elderly women, 2 in the front, 3 in the back, looking wide-eyed and ghostly pale. The driver, clearly confused, said, "Officer, I don't understand. I wasn't speeding. Why did you pull me over?" "Ma'am," the officer said, trying to suppress a smile, "driving slower than the speed limit can be just as dangerous as speeding." "Slower than the speed limit?" she replied. "No, officer, I was doing exactly 22 miles an hour," she said proudly. The officer, now trying not to laugh, explained, "Ma'am, 22 is the route number, not the speed limit." A little embarrassed, the woman smiled and thanked him for pointing out her mistake. "Before I go, ma'am, I have to ask," the officer said. "Is everyone all right? These women seem really shaken and haven't said a word since I pulled you over." "Oh, they'll be fine in a minute, officer," the woman replied. "We just got off Route 142. A routine police patrol was parked outside a bar in the outback when the officer noticed a man stumbling out after last call. The man was so intoxicated, he could barely walk. The officer quietly observed as the man stumbled around the parking lot for what seemed like an eternity, trying his keys on 5 different cars. Finally, the man found his car and fell into the driver's seat. He sat there for a while, flicking the wipers on and off on a dry summer night, switching the blinkers on and off, honking the horn, and turning on the lights. He moved the car forward a few inches, then reversed, staying still for several more minutes as other patrons left. When the lot was empty, he slowly drove off. The officer, who had been watching all this time, started his patrol car, put on the flashing lights, and pulled the man over. After administering a breathalyzer test, the officer was shocked to find no evidence of alcohol in the man's system. Dumbfounded, the officer said, "I'm going to have to take you to the station. This breathalyzer equipment must be broken." The man proudly replied, "I doubt it. Tonight, I'm the designated decoy." A few decades ago, a man and his wife were driving from New York to California. When the fuel gauge dropped, he decided to stop at the next gas station. About 15 minutes later, he saw a mobile station and pulled over to the high-octane pump. The attendant asked, "What can I do for you?" "Fill her up with high test," the driver replied. As the attendant filled the tank, he looked the car over curiously. "What kind of car is this?" he asked. "I've never seen one like it before." The driver puffed up with pride and said, "This, my friend, is a 1999 Cadillac DeVille." "Wow, what features does it have?" "It's loaded," the driver said. "Power steering, power seats, power sunroof, power mirrors, AM/FM radio with a 10 CD deck in the trunk, 100 watts per channel, an 8-speaker stereo, rack and pinion steering, disc brakes, leather interior, digital instruments, and best of all, an 8.8-liter V12 engine." "That's incredible," the attendant said. "How much do I owe you?" "That'll be $30.17, the attendant replied. The driver handed over a $20 and a $10, then reached into his pocket for the rest of the change. Amid the coins, a few golf tees fell out. "What are those little wooden things?" the attendant asked. The driver smirked and said, "Those are what I put my balls on when I drive." The attendant stared in awe. "Wow, those Cadillac people think of everything." A young hip man goes out and buys himself a brand new Ferrari 599 GTO. It costs him nearly $500,000. He takes it for a spin and stops at a red light. Pulling up next to him on a moped is an elderly man looking around 75 years old. The old man glances at the shiny Ferrari and asks, "What kind of car you got there, sonny?" The young man proudly replies, "It's a Ferrari 599 GTO. It cost almost $500,000. "That's a lot of money," the old man says. "Why does it cost so much?" "Because it's a limited edition," the young man exclaims, clearly pleased with himself. "Mind if I take a look inside?" asks the old man. Not at all, says the young man, rolling down the window. The old man leans in to take a look around, then sits back on his moped and says, Nice car, all right. Just then the light turns green. The young man, eager to show off, floors the accelerator. In seconds, the speedometer is at 160 mph. Suddenly, he notices a dot in his rearview mirror. It's getting closer. He slows down a little to see what it could be, and then, whoosh, something zooms past him, going much faster. Impossible, the young man thinks. What could be faster than my Ferrari? But ahead of him, he sees the same dot again. Whoosh! It's the old man on the moped, flying by in the opposite direction. No way, the young man thinks. How can a moped outrun my Ferrari? Then, out of nowhere, the old man zooms by once again. Whoosh! And suddenly, kablam! The moped smashes into the back of the Ferrari, completely destroying the rear end. The young man jumps out, panicked, and rushes to the old man. Oh my God, is there anything I can do for you? He asks frantically. The old man weakly whispers, Please, unhook my suspenders from your side view mirror. A woman visited her doctor and said, Doc, I've noticed something strange, but during my periods I've been having a green discharge. Is that normal? The doctor asked, How often do you engage in, intimate activities? She thought for a moment and then replied, Well, not very often. Maybe twice a year? The doctor leaned back and said, There's nothing to worry about. It's just that your machine is starting to rust from disuse. An old man was quietly eating his meal in a truck stop when 3 bikers walked in. The first biker marched up to the old man, stubbed his cigarette into the old man's pie, then took a seat at the counter. The second biker walked up, spat into the old man's milk, then sat down next to his friend. The third biker went up, flipped the old man's plate over, and then joined the other 2 at the counter. The onlookers were completely stunned by the biker's rude behavior, but the old man didn't seem fazed in the least. He calmly stood up, paid for his meal, and left the diner. A few moments later, one of the bikers looked at the waitress and sneered, Humph, not much of a man, is he? The waitress, without missing a beat, replied, Not much of a truck driver either. He just backed his truck over your 3 motorcycles. There was a young fellow, always inventive and curious, who decided to test how fast a bicycle could go before it became uncontrollable. He asked his friend, who owned an old Chevelle, if he could tie his bike to the bumper to test his theory. His friend agreed. Here's the plan, the young man said. I'll ring my bike bell once if I want you to go faster, twice if I want you to maintain speed, and repeatedly if I want you to slow down. With that, they were off. Things were going well as the car driver slowly sped up to well over 60 mph, and the young man on the bike was handling the speed just fine. However, out of nowhere, an orange Camaro pulled up beside them. The driver of the Chevelle, eager to show off, forgot all about the bike and got into a drag race with the Camaro. Meanwhile, Officer John was sitting on the side of the road with his radar gun ready. He heard the 2 cars before his radar flashed 105 mph. He quickly called into headquarters on his radio. Hey, you guys won't believe this, but there's a Camaro and a Chevelle racing down Highway 3, and there's a guy on a bike ringing his bell and waving his arms trying to pass them. A priest and a rabbi who ran a church and a synagogue across the street from each other decided to go in together and buy a new car. After the purchase, they drove it home and parked it on the street between their buildings. A few minutes later, the rabbi looked out the window and saw the priest sprinkling water on their new car. The car didn't need a wash, so he hurried outside and asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm blessing it," the priest replied. The rabbi paused, thought for a moment, and then went back into the synagogue. He returned shortly with a hacksaw. The priest looked at him, bewildered, and asked, "And what in the world do you plan to do with that?" The rabbi grinned and said, "I've decided I want to bless the car too." He walked over to the back of the car and sawed off 2 inches of the tailpipe. A man goes to Las Vegas to gamble and loses all his money. With nothing left, he doesn't even have enough for a cab, but he flags one down anyway. He explains to the driver that he'd pay him back next time and gives him his phone number, but the driver tells him, "Get the hell out of my cab." So, he walks all the way to the airport and eventually makes it home. Sometime later, he decides to return to Vegas, and this time, he wins big. With his bags packed and winnings in hand, he's ready to head to the airport. At the cab stand, he sees the same driver from last time, the one who kicked him out. He stands there for a moment, thinking about how to get revenge on the driver. He walks up to the first cab in line. "How much to the airport?" he asks. 15, the driver responds. "Great. How much for you to sleep with me on the way there?" The driver immediately says, "Get the hell out of my cab." He moves to the next cab and asks the same question. $15, the driver answers. Perfect. How much for you to sleep with me on the way there? The driver kicks him out as well. He repeats this with every driver in line, each one telling him to leave. Finally, he gets to the last cab, the one driven by the same man from his previous trip. The driver doesn't recognize him and says, "How much to the airport?" $15, the driver replies. The man hands him $15 and says, "Great, let's go." The driver starts driving, and as they slowly pass all the other cabs, the man in the back of the cab smiles enthusiastically, giving them all a thumbs up.